Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are now tuned into Lanisha's Life Lessons and Lattes Fall Series. It is the season finale, and this season we have catered to the men. This has been the men's edition. And if you've been following, thank you so much for being dedicated to the showing of these episodes. This season, of course, I chose men that I hold in high esteem to kind of explore their perspectives and hear their stories. Quite simply, our questions, their answers. And so I am super excited to be closing out this season with a man that I hold very dear to my heart. A lot of you may know him. He is just a dynamic preacher. He is a wonderful leader. He is one of the most powerful preachers in the world, I will go out on the limb and say. And truly, there would be no me without him. He has lifted me as he has climbed. And so I am super excited to have with you my mentor, my real model, and most importantly, my pastor, the Honorable Reverend Dr. Kevin W. Cosby. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, thank you, Lanisha, for such a gracious introduction and this invite. I'm honored to be with you. Just so proud of you. Thank
Well,
you.
thank
I'm
you.
doing well.
Well, good. And tell the people what you're working on if you don't mind. You're like busy. You never stop. You never stop growing, never stop setting goals. Tell the people what you're working on.
Well, I'm working on another degree. I earned my doctorate of ministry degree in the 90s, and I said, well, let me go back and get another degree. So I'm working on a PhD. And so I started this semester, finishing out the semester, and I'm enjoying the process. I feel like I'm back in the 11th grade.
Well, we are cheering for you. We are so proud of you.
Thank you.
Rev, let's go. Oh, go ahead.
No, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Let's go ahead and jump right in. This episode is entitled Heritage and Legacy. This whole entire show is predicated on my latest book, Maximizing Her Navigating Life After Girlhood. And in chapter 7, I talk about attending my aunt's funeral at the age of 22. And that was the first time that I really got to explore the maternal side of my family. And all of those years growing up lacking knowledge about the other part of my history, it really just made me passionate about um, why we should be intentional about preserving the stories and etching the stories of the previous generations in the next generation. I think that history is so important because it serves as a guide, and you have to know where you've been to understand where you're going. And so let's talk about it, Rev. We're
Yeah.
talking all things today. Life, tradition, legacy. This culminates it perfectly.
Mhm.
Reverend Cosby, do you know your heritage? Do you have the privilege of being able to trace back your heritage?
To a great degree, I am. I'm fortunate in that way. In fact, heritage and hope are on the same continuum. You cannot have hope if you don't have heritage, because it's your heritage that fuels your hope. And the reason I am what I am today is because I was well aware of my heritage, especially on my mother's side. I'm the president of Simmons College, and my grandfather and grandmother both met at Simmons. They are the founders of St. Stephen Baptist Church. And so that heritage, that oral tradition was passed down to me. We were not a literary people. So we passed down our traditions through our sacred stories and through the oral tradition. And what's interesting is that when I became the president of Simmons, I already knew a lot about the history of Simmons because my grandparents and my parents, excuse me, passed down the traditions and the stories to me. What I found interesting is that I went and did some actual study and research looking for the actual historical data that would verify the oral traditions that had been passed down to me.
Wow.
And there was absolute congruency between the oral traditions passed down to me and the actual data that you can find in the archives of the University of Louisville regarding Simmons. So, heritage is so very important. Understanding your heritage, knowing your sacred stories, passing those stories down uninterrupted from generation to generation is critically
Mm,
important. It helps create ethnic armor. We live in a world
ooh,
that's
that's
always
good, Rev.
attempting to tear your sense of somebodyness down. And having ethnic armor uh, from your heritage, from your past, is critically important. There's a passage in the Bible that says, and remember the rock from which you have been hewn. Remember the rock from which you've been hewn, which is to say, all of us have been hewn from some great rock, and we need to know the rock from which we've been hewn. If you've been cut from a rock called a diamond, but someone tells you that you're just a pebble, then you have to remember the rock from which you've been hewn. Remember your heritage.
That is beautiful. Ethnic armor. That
Yeah.
ethnic armor. You spoke about these sacreds being preserved by way of, excuse me, you spoke about these stories being preserved by way of oral um, passing.
Mhm.
My question to you is, what did that look like? And can you give me an instance in where, you were sat down and you were told a story with all the sacredness that it was imbued with? What did that look like for you?
Well, I was told the stories, for example, about how my grandfather, who founded St. Stephen Church in 1926, came to Louisville because the only college open to Black people was Simmons. There was a law called the Day Law that prohibited Blacks and whites from being educated together. So the only college, liberal arts college, open to Blacks was Simmons. And he came to Simmons pre-literate, not knowing how to read and write. And he started off in what we would call a GED program that Simmons had, and eventually graduated with a degree in mathematics, and then went on to graduate from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. When I was told these stories when I was a kid, when I went out to the University of Louisville archives, because they have the Simmons College archives at University of Louisville, and I look at these pictures, and there is Benjamin James Miller in the sixth grade, as the president of his sixth grade class in his 20s. And so these types of stories help to inform me as to who I am and what was expected of me. And it set the standard and the bar high for me, hearing these sacred stories about my grandparents on my mother's side and my grandfather on my father's side, who came from northern Alabama with an eighth grade education, because in the 30s and 40s, Blacks could only go to the eighth grade in Alabama because for every $15 appropriated for white students, only 32 cents was appropriated for Black students. Now think about that. 32 cents for Black students, $15 appropriation for white students, which guaranteed that Blacks could only go to the eighth grade and would remain the permanent bottom caste
Mm.
in Alabama. Well, my grandparents came on my father's side from the northern Alabama during the Great Migration in 1940. And they came to Louisville, and their work ethic allowed them to make a lot of money. In fact, my grandfather on my father's side was the number one concrete finisher, Black concrete finisher in the state of Kentucky. So this was a part of my heritage, and it helped inform me as to who I am. And it's important that all of us know our sacred stories, and not depend on anyone else to define you. Let your heritage define you, because whoever can define you can limit you. Self-definition always leads to self-determination. And that self-determination comes by passing on from generation to generation, uninterrupted, your sacred stories.
Listen, that was a whole word, Rev. And I just want to go out and use this moment to be an inviter and say, if you like what you're hearing, you can hear him every Sunday. Please join us at St. Stephen Church. We would love to have you. He's
Yeah.
a dynamic teacher, preacher, just analytical. He breaks it down. Everyone can get it. That was really good, Rev. That was
Thank you.
really good. And one thing that I enjoy about being your understudy and, being blessed to be guided by your leadership is you are an advocate for women. You are an advocate for women, and you have demonstrated that time and time again. Um, Can you speak to the story about when you were actually fired for your advocacy for women?
Yes, our church became St. Stephen, the first church, Baptist church in the state of Kentucky to license and ordain women in ministry, and that was um, that was considered to be a taboo in the
Hmm.
Black Baptist church, especially in the state of Kentucky, because the black pulpit was an exclusively male domain.
Right.
And based on my study of scriptures, especially being influenced by many of the great womanist theologians and the great womanist scholars and womanist thinkers, that that it's oppressive to deprive someone of, of opportunities because of their gender. And so we decided to begin extending the license to women in ministry and ordination to women in ministry. And I was a professor. I graduated from seminary and I was teaching. I was 25 years old. I was teaching at Simmons, and my wife and I, we were about 5 years into the pastorate at St. Stephen's. And I was about to teach a class that summer, one summer, on the book of Job. And I went to Simmons on 18th and Dumino, and the president of the school called me into his office and said to Kevin, I cannot let you teach this class. Now, mind you, I have been preparing to teach this class for several
Right.
months. And he said, I cannot let you teach this class because I've been instructed by the board of trustees to terminate you at Simmons. And I'm saying, what did I do wrong? And he said that you licensed and ordained a woman minister, and we have to let you go. So they fired me because of that. And I'll never forget that when I went home, my wife was sitting on the porch of the house. My daughter, Christine, was a baby, and there was a puppy. We had a puppy. And she said, what are you doing home so early? And I said, well, I just got fired. She said, what did you do? I said, it got out about us licensing Alma Alexander. She was the woman, Alma Alexander. We licensed her. And they fired me because of that. And she said to me, well, you know what? You've got three important things before. She said, let me tell you what you got left. First of all, you got me. So be thankful. Secondly, you got Christine. Thirdly, you got this puppy. Fourthly, you have God. And finally, you have your integrity. And
Mm.
what I realized was that they did not kick me out, they kicked me forward,
Ooh.
because it was that incident that was the catalyst for the growth of St. Stephen Church. St. Stephen Church took off numerically as a direct consequence of that signature event. And the reason it took off was because we did two things. We tapped into the skills and gifts of all the people, irregardless of gender.
Hmm.
And secondly, we had the freedom to do ministry in a very practical way. Like we built a gym. We were the first church to build a gym because we were thinking about being more holistic in serving people's needs, not just a Sunday morning type of thing that dealt with the quote unquote spiritual, but we wanted to be holistic that dealt with relationships and with economics, with self-esteem, with how to build a business, how to secure wealth. We wanted to be, and this was back in the early 80s.
Okay.
And so the church took off and the church grew. And and that was in 84 that happened. And then 21 years later or 20 years later, the same people who fired me called me back to Simmons, but not as a professor, but they called me back as the president of the school. So they didn't kick me out in so many ways. They kicked me forward, but it was all because of the advocacy of women. And still, I don't want to say that we've still gotten it all right as regards to women at our church. There's still so much that we need to be doing in terms of promoting and advocating for women and for the sisters. But I'm glad that we did get that right back in the early 80s.
Yeah. Rev, I really, really respect your admission there simply because it's fair to say that you are a man of many privileges, but still within your privileges, you are not unaware of the realities of other people and other subgroups in society. And so the fact that you are able to use your platform and say, I'm an advocate for women, and while there have been strides made, it's not all right. I
It's not all
really
right.
admire that.
No, no, we've got a long way to go in terms of creating true gender equity in so many areas, in society, in the church. We've got a lot to overcome. I've got some things I have to overcome. So yeah.
That's really good, Rev. Now I must ask you, okay? Remember, this show is our questions, their answers, and so I want to hear from you, a man that I greatly admire. Do you think that men have an advantage in being able to preserve their history more so than women do?
Well, you kind of um, primed me for the question,
Yes.
and
You know
I
what?
think
Let me prompt the people because I don't think I did. So, what I mean by that question is for all of you tuning in, thank you so much for watching. Please take a moment to like and share this broadcast and even tag someone. Um, I think at the altar, there is a lot of history that is lost when women say that I do, simply because once a woman crosses over into that new identity of her husband or whoever she's marrying, um, you notice that his history, dominates if a woman is not intentional about keeping her story at the forefront to coexist alongside the man's. So that's the context of that question. So go ahead, Rev.
I think that if you're not careful,
Mm-hmm.
and to use your words, if you're not intentional about preserving your identity, you can easily be absorbed
Mm-hmm.
into a man and
Yeah.
lose your sense of somebodyness. And
Mm-hmm.
that I think it is critically important that we nurture our sisters, our daughters, to not get lost in anyone else's identity.
Say that,
Uh,
Rev.
that you preserve your identity, protect your heritage, and that you are bringing something to a relationship. Let's say if it's a marriage, you're bringing something to the relationship, just like the man is. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a merger
Yes.
uh, of two identities, but it should not be the diminishment of your identity
Ooh,
uh,
yes. Yes.
in the process of connecting with somebody. I think that is critically important. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it and I'm glad you said it. Listen, that's the whole marketing piece right there. I can just market
Yeah.
that part alone
Right.
because it's so important. And one reason I love President Obama, the list is long, but I believe it was his last speech that he actually gave as the president. And he acknowledged his wife. And he
Yeah.
did not just say Michelle Obama,
Yeah.
which it made such a significant statement when he said it. He addressed her by her full name, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama.
Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, girl of the South Side. You made the White House a place that belongs to everybody. And a new generation sets its sights higher because it has you as a role model.
And
Yeah.
so to me, that was just super powerful. The fact that he acknowledged her full identity, super powerful. Rev, I must ask you, what are you most proud about in your bloodline?
I, I'm most proud of my father. um, because of his determination to rise above sharecropper status in northern Alabama. And being a sharecropper is semi-slavery. It's rich slavery. You never get ahead. You're part of a the bottom caste, and which you never are able to escape it. But he was determined to get an education. He was a very brilliant man, and but he had all the gifts and brilliant, intelligent, uh, drop dead gorgeous. I mean, he was like
Yes, he
probably the
was.
most
Yes.
handsome man you'd ever want to meet, and he knew it. But he had so many gifts, but he had a disadvantage because he was poor. But he was the first Cosby to get to graduate on his mother's side or father's side from high school, Central High School,
Whoop, whoop.
and then graduated from the University of Louisville, and then became the first Black chairman of the Jefferson County School Board. So I think I'm most proud of him. I'll never forget when I was in the sixth grade, he told my principal, his name was Mr. DeSanctis at Stephen Foster Elementary School, 41st and Garland. I was a safety patrol and I did something and he grabbed me by my arm and scratched my arm. And I quit the safety patrol. And on the sixth grade graduation, they called up all of the safety patrol so they could get their certificates. And I was sitting next to my father, and I didn't get called up because I had quit the safety patrol. And I looked over at my dad and I said, well, I guess I told them, didn't I? And I will never forget his words to me. He said, yeah, but I don't like it when guys quit.
Mm.
And that has haunted me all of my life. That when things get tough and you get scraped up a little bit, you don't quit. You just, as the old folks say, keep on keeping on. You put one foot in front of the other. It takes determination and a willingness to persevere. I think that's a sign of maturity. So that's what he possessed, and I've tried to model my life after that. That in the midst of adversity, that you just keep on persevering. You don't give up. You don't quit. And so he's the one in terms of my own heritage. And there are many, that overcame obstacles. I like what Booker T. Washington once said. Booker T. Washington said that you determine success not based on what a person achieved, but you determine success on the basis of what a person had to overcome to succeed. And our people have had to overcome so much. That's why I love reading your books, because to read about all that you've been able to overcome and you did not allow it to overcome you is I think, just absolutely remarkable.
Well, thank you, Reverend Cosby. That really means a lot to me. That really means so much to me.
Yeah.
And I know that your father is definitely proud because you took that lesson from all those years ago and look what you've made of it. Look what you've made of it. You just celebrated your 41st pastoral anniversary. We know that ministering to God's people, it's not an easy task at all. And I don't envy your job, Reverend Cosby, but you do it, and you do it with grace. You do it with excellence, and you're so humble. I think that's what's most noteworthy about you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm proud of you. Very
Thank
proud of
you.
you. Now, question. If you don't come from a strong family, how can you ensure that a strong family comes from you? Maybe there's someone watching this and they're hearing these words, legacy, tradition, heritage, and they're like, that all sounds good, but I have nothing to aspire to because I didn't come from it. How can someone shift their mindset?
Well, first of all, in every family, there are people that you celebrate, and there are people in our families that we wish we could eliminate. Okay, so there is no such thing as a perfect family. let's
Sure.
let's establish that. I only up to this point have talked about people who I perceive to be iconic in my family, but that's not everybody. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like every family, all families, even the family of Jesus Christ,
Yes.
had some very checkered characters. So that's true of all of us. Let's say, for example, that your mother and your father were not somebody that you personally can take pride in.
Mm-hmm.
um, well, there are so many other people that you can make your family, that you can adopt and say, you know what, I didn't learn it from mom, I didn't learn it from dad. But during the course of this conversation, I've already mentioned, for example, Booker T. Washington. So he's not related to me,
Right.
but in a sense, he is related to me if I can learn the lessons that Booker T. Washington taught, if I can learn the lessons of Sojourner Truth, if I can learn the lessons of Fannie Lou Hamer, if I can learn the lessons of a Mordecai Johnson or a Benjamin Bays or a Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks, if I can learn those lessons. So all of us we are developed through a confluence of different people
Mm-hmm.
who have their fingerprints on our lives. So you can adopt psychologically a whole host of people who can define who shapes and molds who you want to be as a person. So don't think that, well, just because my dad was not all he should have been, or my mom was not the person they should have been, that can define me. You can choose psychologically to look to different people to help be your model of what success is supposed to be about.
Yeah. You
And that's
talking
why
good.
that's
Yeah.
why reading is so important. That's why reading and exposure is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Relationships are family is more than just DNA.
Mm-hmm.
It's who we choose to pattern our life after. It's who we choose to allow to mentor and influence us. So don't use, well, this is who mom was, this is who dad was, as your excuse. In fact, I would dare say that during the course of your life, you're going to have, if you're successful, multiple parents, multiple mentors. And it may
Mm-hmm.
start off as your biological mom and your biological dad, but during the course of your life, that's going to expand to include all types of different people that you're going to meet during the course of your life. Yeah.
I greatly agree with that. And I tell you why. As I talked about in my first book, growing up with maternal abandonment and, lacking that presence, I was always looking to other women to kind of fill that void or to pattern myself after. And so I definitely would say I had many spiritual mothers that, they sewed into me, they empowered me, and they definitely helped mold me. So I greatly agree with that statement. You have multiple parents throughout your life.
Yeah, and that because even with your biological parents, even at their best, there is a limit to where they
Hmm.
can take you. Um, they can set your life in a certain trajectory. They can give you certain foundational values that are critical to success because your values are critical. Character and values are absolutely critical to success. But there's still a limit sometimes to where your biological mom and biological dad can take you. And that is why, they have to pass the baton to somebody else. And you have to be open to allowing other people to shape and mentor you. Your affiliations are like elevator buttons. And
Hmm.
elevator buttons do one or two things. Your elevator button will either take you up or they will bring you down. And the people that you associate with are the elevator buttons of your life, who will either take you up or they will bring you down. So even if, regardless of what family you came from, that does not have to define you. You define yourself, and you allow other people to influence you. Continue to read. It's all about exposure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I would add to that, Rev, is I think as you mature throughout life, you really learn to have grace and extend that to your parents for what you maybe back then would have said, oh, that was just a failure. As an adult, you walk away from some conversations and you're like, man, I get it, girl. Like I
Yeah.
know me and my mom have had some deep heart to hearts. And after really not seeing her as a mom, but seeing her just as a woman going through things and her own issues and whatever struggles were before her, walking away from those conversations like, I get it, you know? So I definitely think that that's another level of maturity is being able to understand your parents outside of being parents.
Yes. And you have to, especially for me, and I think, this is the first time I think that on any public forum, I'm about to say what I'm about to say. I've never said this before,
We get
ever,
exclusive.
in the pulpit or anywhere. And that is, my mother passed when I was young. She passed a week before my 11th birthday. And I did not get to know her except as a disciplinarian. And all my life, I've wrestled with that. I've wrestled with the fact that I did not get to know her. um, I'm not angry because she died. I'm angry because before she died, while she was living, I did not have the relationship that I should have had with her, except for her being a disciplinarian. There's two ways to motivate your children. One is negative reinforcement or negative motivation, and one is positive motivation. Negative motivation is you always are feeling the consequences of not achieving or underachieving. Positive motivation is you incentivize your child to excel through rewards. In my experience, like many kids, I think during the era in which I was raised, there was too much negative reinforcement with switches and belts, and positive reinforcement with rewards and congratulations and things such as this. So I've had to wrestle with that whole issue of my mother dying so young and me not getting to know her and things such as this. And uh, uh, so and really this is the very first time in my life that I think in any forum I've been free to acknowledge that. And so I said that because I know that you've had challenges sometimes with that. And so,
Yes, sir.
yeah,
Thank you for sharing that, Rev.
yeah,
Thank you for, being vulnerable enough to open up and reflect and just share your truth. And I think the good thing, I know sometimes when I do these kind of talks, people say, you know, your loved ones don't get mad at you for going that deep. But I think in order to heal, you have to identify.
yeah, you do.
And you definitely have to identify. And I think it does no good to uphold an image, but to be broken underneath. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I think a goal of mine is to always be honest, be authentic, and really bridge over what some people would say are troubled waters in the most positive way. So thank you for sharing that, Rev. Thank you for your
yeah.
truth. My next question for you, are there any precious heirlooms in your family that exist? Anything that has been passed down through the generations? And if so, what may they be?
Well, psychologically, my parents were wise to pass on our sacred stories. So I know history because my parents, fed us the narrative. So I know the narrative psychologically. But in terms of heirlooms that I can point to, I've got a Bible up in my office, and it was given to me on Christmas, and my mother wrote in it. And it was Christmas 1968, and my mother signed it and autographed it. My father put in it to my son, Kevin, may you put your hope in Christ and never, something to that effect. Your dad, December 25th, 1968. And it's upstairs in my office, my study. And then 7 months later, my mother passes. So that's the only thing that I have from her with her name in it. Wow. And then I have a beautiful star sapphire ring that I wear occasionally that my father gave me when I was a kid. And besides that's it.
Beautiful. Yeah. What do you intend to do with those objects, those heirlooms?
Pass it down to my children, and hopefully they'll pass it down to their kids. Maybe one day if they're collecting some Cosby stuff at Simmons when it's a major university and they're doing some profiles on the presidents, I might have a little case or something and I'll put it there, for posterity's sake. But I hope to pass a lot of this stuff down to my grandchildren and children, but it's no good to pass it down if they don't understand the value of it. And you weigh the value of it not based on its cash register value. Some things cannot be measured based on its in terms of its quantifiable value. You measure the value based on the fact that this represents history, this represents heritage, something has been passed down from the elders, and so I hope to pass it on. Yeah.
That is very beautiful, very beautiful. And that's something that I've really enjoyed asking. And I think that the answers vary depending on who you're talking to. I remember a professor in college, she was a white woman, and she told me about a coat that had been in her family for 7 generations. And I was like, my goodness. And she told me about everything that it takes to, keep it preserved, and how her great grandmothers, and she had china sets. And I thought it was so interesting. But when I talk to my Black friends, I find that not often can we have those same experiences.
Right.
So it's really interesting, finding people who do have those precious heirlooms in their family. Yeah, it's made me very intentional about, what do I want to pass down? So that's beautiful. That's very beautiful, Rev. My question to you, we're wrapping up here. If you are watching, please take a moment to like and share and even tag someone. I am very happy to be joined here with the Honorable Reverend Dr. Kevin W. Cosby. Awesome, dynamic preacher, leader, great man of God. My question to you, Rev, is you eulogize a lot of people. I imagine over your career, the list just goes beyond what you could imagine. In terms of creating a life that has remembrance, that inspires people, what should people keep in mind as they're journeying through life, so that one day when they are eulogized, it may be a eulogy that is noteworthy, one that is moving, one that is inspiring, and one that has God's handprint on it?
Good question. Well, let me answer the question by, first of all, answering the question directly, and then secondly, give you an example of my answer.
Okay.
You can live life on 3 levels, and it's easy to remember the 3 levels of living life because they begin with the letter S. Okay. The first S is survival. And some people live their life only to survive. The animal that best represents that is the turtle. Someone said that when God made, and this is a mythology, but when God made creation, that one person came to God and said, God said, what do you want most? And the person said, I want security. So God made turtles, and God made animals with shells on them so that they could hide. And so there's a lot of people who live life based only on security. I don't want to take risk.
Right.
And then there's this higher level of living, and those are people who live life for the second S word, and that's success. And by success, I'm talking about what's in it for me. How does it promote me? How does it advance me? It's a very me centric, self centered type of living. But the highest level of living, the type of life that is most impactful and most celebrated is not survival or success, but a level of significance. Uh, the person who lives for success asks the question, what's in it for me? The person who lives a life for significance asks, what's in me for other people? How
One
can
moment, Rev. That was so good, but the connection went out. What was the success level?
the success level is what's in it for me?
Okay.
The significance level is what's in me for other people. And the people who are most celebrated, eulogized. The word eulogy means good word. It's the Greek word uh, good word. Those who get the good word are those who've lived a life of significance. And if you're looking for an example of a eulogy that I did, it would be the eulogy of Muhammad Ali. The dictionary for the word fidelity, and it had two words, Lani Ali. And
Mhm.
the reason why Muhammad Ali was most celebrated was because of his willingness to sacrifice his career as a boxer and all the money that he could have made during the prime of his career because he was opposed to an unjust war in Vietnam. And he's remembered because of that. And and other people like Martin Luther King Jr. Um, or Harriet Tubman, who who lived a life of significance because of how she helped to advance other people. And I think that ultimately we find true self actualization when we are trying to help other people become all that they should become, especially when we're doing it for those who are voiceless, the least, the last, and the left out. Yeah.
I love that answer. The three levels. Can you give it to us again, Rev?
Level number one, I will live a life of security. I'm not going to take any risk. Level number two, I'm gonna live a life of significance. It's all about me. It's all about my advancement. Level number three is a life of significance, and that is, I I want to make the world better. And you're never functioning at a higher level than when you're living to make the world a better place.
Powerful. And
Yeah.
that's you have truly made that a staple in your ministry, really helping the voiceless and giving opportunity to those who otherwise wouldn't have it, those who have been socially isolated. We actually talked about that. And you really mean what you say, and you put your efforts and your interest behind it. Um, you're a great example of that. You truly are. Um, Yeah, Rev. That's good. A life of significance. We should all aim for significance.
Yes, and so are you. I mean, that's what I appreciate most about you is that your story of how to overcome adversity and to be the outstanding, excellent woman that you are. I mean, you're just a walking billboard for what I'm trying to talk about. You are a walking advertisement of significance, of overcoming adversity. So it's just look in the mirror, Miss Lanisha.
Well, thank you, Reverend Cosby. Oh, thank you. You're making me blush.
Yeah.
My last question for you, Rev. As we close out a discussion about life, tradition, legacy, I must ask the question to you, which you are building something grand through the lives of other people. I really don't think you will ever be able to measure the impact of your legacy because it has had such a rippling effect, not just here in the community, not just here in Louisville, but throughout the world, truly. We have one church, three campuses, two states. But even as the pandemic has happened, we have seen our ministries grow to across
Right.
the nation and even across the world. So, Rev, if you had to sum it up, if you're thinking about it at all, what do you want to be remembered most about your life?
First of all, I want to be remembered as, by the grace of God, um, as a person that treated people right. Um, that a person who really was concerned about the voiceless in society. I want to also be remembered as a person that helped build institutions that outlived me.
Mm,
Um, the only thing we have to pass down is our story, the sacred stories, and our sacred institutions. And I want to be able to pass down to the next generation a strong church named St. Stephen and an HBCU. Louisville has an HBCU. We did not have an HBCU. We had a college, Simmons, but it was not accredited. It was not an HBCU. The potential was always there. But God opened my eyes to see the potential, and a lot of people helped. And now Simmons is the success college of America. No college has ever done what Simmons College is doing, and at the right time, because um, Biden and President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris had a news conference today, and they talked about what are the things they're going to do for the Black community. And one of the things that they mentioned was HBCUs. Well, when you mention HBCUs, you're talking about something in Louisville, Kentucky, namely Simmons College. There are only 90 cities in the United States that have a historical Black college or university, just 90. There are 35,000 cities in America. So Louisville is one of only 0.008% of the cities in America that has an HBCU, which has the potential of building a Black middle class in Louisville and becoming an economic engine for the Black community years beyond my lifetime. So I just want to be remembered as during my generation and during my lifetime that I did something to strengthen the institutions that were passed down to me from my foreparents. And like a relay race, I can pass it down to the next generation so that, every generation should be further along because of the preceding generation.
mhm.
Um, Everything that we hold sacred, we will one day have to pass on to the next generation. And so I want to be complementary with the next generation. There's a book out called Neighbors Across Time. It's a great book, Neighbors Across Time. And it's basically saying that when we think of a neighbor, we think of somebody who's in physical proximity to us.
Mhm.
But this author argues that we also are generational neighbors, so that my generation is a neighbor to I'm on the cusp of being a baby boomer and a Gen Xer. I'm a late baby boomer, so I'm right in the middle. So the baby boomers pass on something to Gen X, and Gen X pass on something to millennials, and millennials pass on something to Generation Z. So we want to make sure that we're good neighbors across the generation. I will say this, that my generation, late baby boomers and Gen Xers have not been good generational neighbors, I don't feel, to millennials. I
Talk
think
about it, Rev. Go ahead.
I mean, for example, the reason when I went to college, I had no student debt.
Hmm.
Okay, so we could go to college in the 70s and you got grants and you went to college free. Now think about that. No student debt. And that's because the generation preceding me, namely um, the baby boomers, the baby boomers, and the survival generation. The survival generation is the generation from 1920. They're called survival generation, and then you have the boomers. The boomers starting in 46. Boomers is 46 to 64. That's the boomers. Before 46 was the survival generation. My father was the survival generation. And they are the ones who fought for civil rights and equal opportunity for blacks, especially after World War II in 1945. That's the generation of Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X. They fought, went to jail. Medgar Evers got shot in the back. They went to jail. They protested. They marched so that we might have opportunity. And we got opportunities. Doors opened up for us. We were able to go to college. We were able to get subsidized by the federal government, and rightly so. But they opened the door for us. And then the minute the next generation went through the door, they shut the door and forgot that the only reason that they were in the place in the first place was because the preceding generation sacrificed for them.
Can you
So
talk about what that looks like, the door being slammed on the millennials, like a practical example?
one would be in terms of how hard we have been on the what Eugene Robinson calls in his book Disintegration, Pulitzer Prize winning author, he calls the abandoned poor,
Hmm.
that black professionals in the after open housing in 68 moved out of urban space into white suburban space. So you had the black professionals moving out. And when they moved out, you said about me, you said that I helped lift you as I climbed.
Yes.
We did not help lift those in poverty as we climbed. In fact, to a certain degree, we were very harsh, very judgmental. Um, we don't realize that the economy changed. Many of the jobs of the 60s that paid great wages, those jobs were eliminated. You've got the Uberization of our economy now, and where you can work for Uber, you got gig jobs that don't
Yeah.
pay living wages nor provide benefits.
Hmm.
And so our generation, we act like, we want to tell your generation, well, look at how I struggled and made it. Why don't you make it?
Yeah.
Well, my generation had more opportunities than your generation has. So just the judgmentalism, I think that my generation has, I think we have failed to a great degree, the millennials. And take for example college,
Yeah.
all the student loan debt that you have to accumulate that will dog your tracks sometimes for the rest of your life. You
Hmm.
you'll be using your Social Security to pay student loan debt,
Yeah.
and that's why I
Ooh-wee.
think that your generation likes Bernie Sanders.
Oh yeah, we love Bernie. Feel the burn.
Bernie represents the way politics was done in the 60s. He represents it. And so we moved instead of doing Bernie Sanders type politics, we moved to the center. We became neoliberals, and which is nothing but another word for conservatives. And we did not make sure that resources and wealth was allocated in a more equitable way to provide those who were quote unquote at the bottom opportunities for success. Mm-hmm.
That's good. And you've also have said it is hard to survive as a millennial if you don't have help or you haven't been propped up from the efforts of the boomer generation. And I
Correct.
have found that true. Just myself looking at my story, I think I do very well for myself, but I will have to say my father has helped me out tremendously. I mean, in the small privileges that people bypass, but they don't realize it makes a huge deal. Him paying my cell phone bill, or him allowing me to save $60, $80 because I'm on his insurance plan. Like,
Right.
those things go a long way. And one of my best friends, she does extremely well for herself. She just purchased a house on the west side of the country, and she was able, I believe, to put down 30,000 for the simple fact her mom taught her very early about healthy credit, having a
Mm-hmm.
healthy credit profile. And
Mm-hmm.
so, although she worked very hard, she was able to stay at home without the charges of overhead. So her
Yeah.
mom didn't make her pay rent, or her father paid her car insurance and paid off her car. And a lot of, I don't know, Rev, tell me your opinion on it. I guess you get into, I don't want to say it's nepotism, but okay, so two different thoughts that I'm exploring here. How do you feel about parents that put that responsibility on children before they have a chance to financially bloom, to give back to the household? How does that make you feel?
I think that we must do everything we can, especially our generation that had so many advantages and opportunities, to help prop up your generation.
Absolutely.
In fact, no white person in your generation, for the most part, the masses of whites, are not being sustained by the income that
Yeah,
they're making.
right.
They're being subsidized by boomer parents.
Hmm.
So boomer parents are giving them what's called in vivo life transfers. In vivo means while you're living. So
Mm,
in vivo life transfer may be in the form of a down payment on a home. It may be in the form of purchasing your car for you. It may
yes.
be in the form of helping you pay your rent.
Right.
It's all types of transfers that are taking place that Black parents cannot pass on to their children.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not that a woman who is your age is, you two might be at the same job, making the
Hmm.
same, but you're using public transit and she's driving a 2019 whatever Capri.
Yeah.
Okay. And the only reason is because she's been hooked by her
Yeah.
boomer parents who prop her up. And black millennials don't have that same type of support system
Absolutely.
because we don't have the same amount of wealth. Black people don't have wealth. We're 13% of the population, and we only control 2.6% of the wealth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very hard code facts.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can feel hopeless at times. I know, with the ADOS movement, and even the West Louisville forums that you do. I've been able to learn so much about the socio-political realities of Black people.
Yeah,
and how we really have to create policies that are going to instate real change. If the next generation
absolutely
has a chance, stands a chance to redeem the blessings of what I would say Abraham, to be able
correct.
to own land, to have wealth, to understand how to maintain that wealth.
Mhm.
There's a lot of education that needs to happen. There's a lot of unlearning that has to happen, but we have
Correct.
to identify those things. But yeah,
Yeah.
when I was able to be cued in on the fact of how my friend was able to do so well, that sent a light bulb off in my head and say, I want to be able to do that for my kids someday too.
Right.
And you just, yeah, Rev. I think that, I guess it's survival mode. It's not necessarily that black people or black parents, they mean to set their children up for failure, but they're surviving. So I think the
Right.
mindset of a lot of people is, um, you can help power this economic engine because you're able to work. You have the capability to work. You need to bring in something. You need to contribute. So it's not to take some of the load off my back.
Right.
But I think that mindset can be very detrimental. And it
Mhm.
really doesn't put us to, it doesn't really give us the space to make great progress.
Right.
My next question for you, how do you feel about Black nepotism? How do you feel about the generations that do have blessings to redeem because of the last generation's work, and they say, I don't want to do that, I want to do it myself. I don't want the success that you can hand me. I want to go and get it out the mud myself. How do you feel about that mentality, Rev?
I mean, I can applaud the impulse.
Uh-huh.
You want to be a self-reliant person,
Right.
but I think it's a delusional impulse
Hmm.
because there's no such thing as a self-reliant person. All of us are successful because of the assistance that we have received from other people. And I would not be at St. Stephen Baptist Church as the pastor if it had not been for some nepotism. My
Right.
grandfather was the pastor of the church, and he did such a great job during his 44 years as the pastor that even 10 years after he had passed off the scene, the congregation was willing to give a 20-year-old man
Wow.
the opportunity to come and preach, be their pastor. I had not turned 21 yet.
20.
So
Wow.
um, all of us build on someone else.
Yes.
You know, I just would say the thing we should be concerned about is that we don't destroy what was passed down to us,
Hmm.
um, so that we don't desecrate the sacrifices that were made for us. And then, secondly, we should live our life knowing that we've got to pass something down also to the next generation. So um, I think that we can build on other people, but it's still us who have to do the building.
Yes.
So it's a both and, you know. You take advantage of the opportunities through your connections, and
Yes.
and and connections are important.
Hmm.
Your social networks are important. In fact, sometimes your social networks and your social capital is the best capital that you have. One of the reasons why white kids do well is because they got connections that black kids just don't have. So, all this, I'm going to do it myself. I'm a self-reliant individual. I'm going to be self-made. That's delusional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
You,
how you said that. And my closing thoughts on it is simply this. It is hard to understand how far you can go when you're so busy retracing the steps that someone was already gracious enough to take for you.
there you
And
go.
and that's my mindset on it. So if anyone is watching this and you have, like Reverend Cosby said, you have that impulse, it's admirable that you are ambitious and you want to do it yourself, right? And you don't want to be subsidized by other people's efforts or hard work. But I would agree with you, Revan. It's delusional, and I would say it's almost borderline disrespectful.
It is very, yeah, and rebellion.
Yes, 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 yes. Reverend Cosby, thank you so much for
Lanisha,
closing
thank
out
you.
this
I'm just so honored
series.
to be invited to the premier podcast, the premier conversation. And you're doing such a great job. Just keep it up, and I'm looking forward. And I might be in the nursing home one day, but girl, you great things are you got greatness all over you, and I'll be in the nursing home watching you on television cheering. My wife next to me hit me on my head like this.
Oh, we love Sister Barnetta. Well, again, I am because you have lifted me as you have climbed. So I feel forever indebted to you. May God bless you, Reverend Cosby. We are
God bless
so proud of
you.
you. Thank you for all that you are. I love
Love you,
you.
love
You
you, dear.
guys, thank you so much for rocking with me this season. The men's edition, our questions, their answers. Please stay tuned for more Life Lessons in Lattes fall series. I love you guys. I am Lanisha Porter. Thank you so much for watching.